Can y'all hear me now? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Sorry, that's my bad. I don't know why it was connected to different microphone. Hold on, let me just make sure that my headphones aren't even connecting. Hold on, give me a quick second. Sorry about that. Now I can hear. Okay, awesome. Great. Sorry about that. Okay, let's go over all of that again. So what did I say? Okay, first, happy to look over any of your resumes, even after graduation. If you want me to look over your resume, the best way to send it to me is actually over a Google Doc. So if you send me something like this and give me up to comment access is good enough so that I can look at something and add my comments onto how to rephrase whatever I see on your resume. And most likely I will pretty much only look at the technical projects section unless there's something else you want me to look at with your employment history. I feel like there's nothing much I can say. I think your career coach has a better grasp on that stuff than I do. So if you want me to take a look, I'll be looking through the technical projects section. This is the Flatiron School template that your career coach will send you. I don't know if they've changed it recently, but it should look very, very similar to this. At the top, you have your name, you have your location, phone number. I don't think they need anymore, but always good to have more information than less. Your email, your GitHub, your blog, if you have a website, and your LinkedIn. Now, these should all be hyperlinked, and it's really cool because if you were to do this off of Google Docs and you export this as a PDF, the links will actually still have click-through ability. So that'll be good to do. Now, here they actually have you put a short description. I actually think this might be optional for some people. I, on my resume, don't have a section like this, but if you think it better frames what you want someone to know about you, by all means. I think it's also kind of a game of how do you cram everything into a single page. I believe if you have been working in the industry for over, I want to say like 10 years, you can have multiple pages of a resume, but that's something I think you should discuss with your career coach instead. Today, I'm going to focus most on this technical projects section, as well as how do you put on Flatiron School. So let me start with Flatiron School because that's a little bit easier. So to start, in terms of education, how should you list the bootcamp on your resume? This is actually what I have on my resume. I just put Flatiron School. It is an immersive data science bootcamp. You can put full-time online data science bootcamp if you'd like as well. Put the date range and the location is online. And if you're putting like your university or your past educational experience, it should follow a similar format as well. So this is fairly simple. Feel free to copy and paste this formatting if you'd like. All right. Oh, by the way, yesterday, all of my bullet points on GitHub are all at the bottom of this doc as well. Right. So talking about technical projects, I think that's the main thing that I think a lot of people are going to have some difficulty coming up with. I think for a lot of you is going to be your first technical resume. So here are my tips and tricks on how you can put that together. So first, pick your project. We did 5 projects in all, and it's not necessarily the case that you have to do projects 3, 4, 5, even though those are your most recent and maybe your most like advanced. It's not always necessary to put, your capstone, phase 4, phase 3. Phase 2 is a definite, you can definitely put your phase 2 project on there. You can also put your phase 1 project on there. It really depends on what kind of roles you are looking for. If you're looking for something that's more on the business analytics side or the data analyst side, project 1 is actually a lot more suitable than something like a neural network project. So think about the roles that you will be going for. Also happy to talk about this during one-on-ones if you want help picking your projects. But yeah, it doesn't always have to be the last 3 projects. Also, something that I started doing as I was looking for a job. Let's see, the last time I was job searching was actually like right when the pandemic hit. And when that was happening, I actually found myself switching out the projects that I was putting on my resume. So for example, I actually have roughly 6 to 7 projects that I have ready-made like descriptions for, and then depending on the job that I was applying to, I would just switch them out. And what I have is actually a Google Doc with like all of my project descriptions that I can copy and paste over to my resume, export and send to different jobs. I personally think that that is a way for me to keep track of the different roles that I'm applying for, as well as, just have, if I realize that, maybe my phase 1 project is really, really good for this specific role, I can very easily cut and paste that project description in. So if you like to have like a little, I don't know, not archive, but standby section of projects somewhere that exists on your computer or on Google Docs, you could do that as well. So in picking your projects, I do think it depends on where you see yourself. So if you already have a pretty good idea of the industries and the kind of job function you want to do, then maybe you cater your projects to that. But I think most people are a little bit less, are a lot more industry agnostic, I think. So I do usually recommend having more variety on your projects, whether you have, one full machine learning, predictive modeling project, maybe one more analyst-like project, and then perhaps another different machine learning project. Like perhaps you did like a recommendation system that's not like a straight up direct prediction, or a time series that's more of a forecast. You can kind of diversify the projects like that. Also, not necessarily what kind of project, but you can also diversify based on what are the things that you want to highlight. If you want to highlight, your hyperparameter tuning for phase 3, for example, have that. Or if you want to highlight your, I guess that's also hyperparameter tuning, but neural network tuning from phase 4, you could do that too, in contrast to a full-fledged machine learning process project that you're doing now as your capstone. So feel free to pick and choose. You can also have like backup data points that, not data points, but description points that you switch out depending on what other projects are on your resume. So yeah, I was saying this before, you can definitely switch out your projects for specific roles, and I do something like that as well. Cool. So this is Flatiron School's template. You can kind of play around with it. Like I, for example, changed all of these fonts because I'm not a fan of, I don't know, what's this, Arial? I don't know. But basically the formatting, and I do actually use this formatting myself. Start with your project name and GitHub link in bold at the top. Then you have a brief description of the project's functionality and purpose. This I actually personally like to italicize so that it kind of splits up the text between this and this. If the font's exactly the same, it's a little bit harder to read, I think. For me personally, italicizing this section makes it a little clearer. Also, you have your 3 to 4 bullet points. Whether it's 3 or 4 bullet points kind of depends on how much space that you have. Mine are all 3 bullet points because I did also want to highlight more of my employment history. But yeah, if you have less relevant employment to tech roles, then maybe you talk more about your projects. So yeah. Okay. So again, this is how you set up each of your projects on your technical project section. Exactly what I said before. As I mentioned, I also like to italicize this. I think my resume is actually, I want to say it's the font Garamond or Georgia. Yeah, mine is Garamond. So it doesn't really matter what font you're using as long as it's clear. Cool. In terms of project title and in terms of project URLs, some people have named their project repos Flatiron School Phase 3 project, or Phase 3 classification project, for example. On GitHub, you can actually go in and change the title of your repo to be something that's a little bit more interesting and relevant. So feel free to do that. Actually, I do recommend that you do that instead. And in your project title, also don't have the words like Flatiron School in it, phase whatever in it. You want it to be more representative of the project that you're doing. In terms of subtitle, like this brief description over here, what kind of project it is, that's the most important thing, I think. Whether it is an analysis project, that would be like phase 1, regression, that's phase 2, classification, is it a rec system of forecasting? And if relevant, you can mention part of your business case in this short description. I did mention this earlier, you can change the titles of your repo on GitHub to be something a little bit more indicative of the project. Now, another thing about project URLs, if you worked in a pair or in a trio for one of your projects, the project is owned by one person. Something that you can do is, let's say, let me see if I have an example. If I have this GitHub project over here, actually, let me go on to, I know I have one example here. So this was one of my projects. It actually started off with this person had made the repo for our pair project. And if I use this URL, you can see that this isn't my username. In order for the URL to be under my username, all I did was I forked it over. And after I forked it over, you can see that the URL now has my username. So this can be something that you do. And also that now I've forked this over, I can make changes independent of my project partner's work, if that makes sense. So now that I'm a forked copy, it's much easier for me to make my independent changes. If I want to touch up anything and I don't need to work together with my project partner anymore, I can do that independently. So yeah, quick tip for having the URL be under your own username. All right. So yeah, if relevant, mention part of your business case. But this is a quick example. This is actually what I use for one of my projects on my resume, and I do have a couple other bullet points, but these are just some examples. I'll talk through those later. So here it is, a natural language processing content classifier project. So this is actually what I named it. It can be anything you want. For this case, I really wanted to highlight that I was doing NLP. So because of that, I literally put that in the title. And I URL'd it over there. And then my subtitle was a machine learning classifier that predicts if Reddit posts are related to art or programming. So in terms of title and description, I feel like something like this, I think more important than following this format, being consistent with the descriptions of your project. So I'm not going to show you my full resume, but all of my projects on my resume follow this same format in its description. So here is like a machine learning classifier, blah, blah, blah. For my regression project, I would put like a regression project that predicts blah, 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 or a recommendation system that blah, blah, blah. So just being more consistent with in between your three projects, I think that makes it a lot more neater, a little bit more organized. Unless you feel like a certain way for a specific project isn't really as coherent, then sure, you can change it around, because again, you want to maximize for clarity and organization. Okay. So in terms of descriptions of your projects, I mentioned that for my resume, I only have 3 bullet points per project, but I do like to switch out the bullet points based on what other projects I'm putting on my resume for a particular job. So because of that, these are the ones that I'm sharing over here, but it's important to not to be repetitive across your 3 projects to highlight your breadth. Because yes, you use pandas for all 5 of your projects, but it's not necessary to mention that you did pandas data cleaning across all 3 of the projects that are on your resume. If you can do it with one, you can use those lines to highlight some of your other skills. So in terms of examples, this is what I put for mine. Here, I wanted to show that I was able to implement scikit-learn models and tune hyperparameters. So here I trained, tuned, and tested 9 classification models from scikit-learn, also evaluating performance with reduced dimensionality via PCA. So I used some PCA in this project as well, threw that in there. Also utilized NLTK to pre-process text data, achieving a 97% F1 score with a naive-based classifier. And then also I built a data pre-processing and modeling pipeline to host a project on a Flask web application. So these are my 3 points. You can see that they're kind of talking about different things. This was talking about model implementation. This is more about pre-processing as well as final modeling. And this one is just on, I guess, modeling pipeline and the fact that I know how to make a web application. So they're kind of focusing on 3 different things. Yeah, not being repetitive. Which I feel like now I'm reading this for, like, again, I feel like I could be a little bit better because I have pre-processing here, pre-processing here. But anyways, this is more about the pipeline, I guess. Okay. So here are some tips of things that I've seen in resumes that I think I really like. For some background on why you should listen to me, I guess, is I used to interview people for Flatiron School, not just incoming students, but also other instructors. So I've seen a good bit of resumes in the last like 2-3 years. So in terms of data wrangling and EDA, some good points to have. If your data set is fairly large, mention that number. So here I put 40,000 plus instances of text data. If you're dealing with a lot of data, sometimes it's just impressive for people to see a large number on your resume. Data wrangling buzzwords that you can use. If you use an API at any point or any sort of wrapper, if you use Twint, I know a lot of you are using Twint, you queried your data. If you web scrape your data, mention web scraping. I really like this word personally. If you combine multiple data sources, which I think all did for our very, very first project, you synthesize data sets. And also pre-process is a typical data science word as well. But I like synthesize, especially if you use multiple data sources in the same project. Also, if you want to highlight your EDA, especially if you're going for something that is more analytical role rather than modeling predictive work, if you're doing just something that is probably like a data analyst role. Highlighting your EDA is a good idea. Derived insights from, because you want to show the fact that from, you know, a bunch of raw data and numbers, you're able to bridge over that non-technical to non-technical and, you know, derive insights or business ideas or recommendations. Again, exactly what we did for our very first project. Derived insights, that's a good buzzword. Performed an extensive pre-modeling exploratory data analysis on blah, blah, blah. You can do that too. And sometimes if it's relevant, mention your business case in one of those bullet points. You want to really show, especially for data analyst roles, also business intelligence roles, or anything that is more connected to strategy of a company. You really want to see if you can mention the business case if possible. So these are some good buzzwords to use in one of the lines in your resume. Okay, next for modeling. Most important, include a metric. Now, if you remember, I think when we were back in like phase 2 or 3, I talked about a baseline model. That using a baseline model is another way that you can kind of like show a potential employer more numbers and metrics. So here, if there was a significant increase from a baseline due to tuning or feature engineering, mention that. Perhaps in the form of a percentage increase if the number sounds more impressive. As an example, if your first baseline model started off at a 20% accuracy and you eventually got it to 50%, that is a 150% increase. So you can mention something like that. I believe I have one of those points in one of my other projects on my resume as well. And I think mine is like a 200% increase. So I don't know. I just think that number sounds a little bit more impressive. It's a lot more attention grabbing to see a big number like that. So mention that. And you can sort of tie that together with, you know, hyperparameter tuning, extensive grid search, or if you did feature engineering, which I know some of you have done, you can talk about that. The fact that you are able to get your model to improve from one level to another, that's very, very impressive. And that is a lot of what a data scientist job is about. Also, you can phrase it differently based on your problem. So for example, if you're using a specific metric, so I know for a lot of imbalanced data sets, I've had you all focus on recall as a metric. And so you can kind of phrase that differently rather than putting the word recall that a lot of not very technical, not as technical recruiters will understand. You can actually phrase it differently. For example, for pneumonia detection, if you had used recall, you would correctly diagnose 97% of pneumonia x-rays in unseen data. So that is basically 97% recall in predicting pneumonia. So you can phrase things differently like that. You don't necessarily have to use like F1 score, recall precision, if you feel like it could be a little bit too technical. So that's another thing that I've seen that I actually really like. Cool. Did you test many models? I know all of you who did your phase 3 projects tested at least 4 to 5 models. So if you did, mention how many. If you use fewer, you might want to mention specifically which models you tested. Typically, if you're by words mentioning the models that you are testing, try to mention a variety of models. For example, like if you really only tune tree models, it's kind of not a good use of space to mention, oh, I did bagged trees, random forest, and ADA boost and gradient boosting, because those are all kind of tree models. If you want, I would like take out all of that and say use a combination of decision trees and other tree ensemble methods, just so it doesn't take up space in the page. I guess on that note, you can see that here, each of my lines are going into a second line. On my own resume, I've actually like reduced the margins a bunch, as well as and like played around with like the font size so that it all fits on one line. So that's something to consider as well, the space constraint that you have. So being concise. All right. Did you build a function to automate your modeling process or use pipelines? I believe all of you here also did for your phase 3 project. That was one of the things that I asked you all to do. So you did automate the modeling process. A lot of you to different extents, whether you did an entire model for testing all the baseline models, baseline vanilla models, whether you did that for an entire pipeline, whether you automated your data cleaning processes with functions as well. Very, very useful to mention that. The creation of pipelines is very much overlooked in the data science process, but is very, very important as well. So keywords to use, automated is a great word to use. Built or created pipeline for model testing or evaluation. Those are common phrases to use too. Also, did you come up with actionable recommendations for your business case from your model or through post-modeling EDA? As an example, for your classification project, I had you all do post-modeling EDA so that you can make more quantitative and actionable recommendations from your modeling results. I think it's very important to mention that, especially if you're looking for a more strategic role or a more analytical role. So mention that as well. This is something that I like to see, or this is something that I think people are impressed by when they see resumes. Derived 3 actionable recommendations, blah, 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 from feature importances from random forest models, something like that. To mention they're able to take things from your model that is fairly technical and translate that into how a business can use these insights to improve or to make more money, things like that. Cool. Any questions so far? All right. Some additional things that you can mention that are outside of the typical data science process. And I know a lot of these things we haven't implemented yet, but while you're in between graduation and looking for a new job, if you're continuously working on your projects, these are things that you can work on and then include in your resume as well. So did you create a front end? You can mention the library and flip or framework. So for example, Flask, which is the example that I talked about last week that most people use for their machine learning models, Dash or Jupyter Dash to create dashboards. That's really interesting as well. Streamlit. I don't know if I've mentioned Streamlit yet, but Streamlit is a very plug and play front end. Highly recommend you check it out. I've personally never used it before, but I have a lot of students that have found it and found it very easy to implement. It's basically a very, what's the word? Like very plug and play. I believe you can just plug in give it your model and you can have, it looks very default with like a web page. Look it up. I highly recommend if you want to get a very quick front end up and running. Did you utilize SQL or did you create your own SQL database? I did this SQL session, 3 weeks ago. So feel free to look at that if you want to turn your data, the data set that you're using into a SQL database, you can mention that. And as you know, SQL is highly sought after currently for data roles. So mentioning SQL as part of a project in your resume could be very, very useful. This is a really interesting one that I saw from someone who was actually going for more project management or product management roles. If you worked with somebody else, you can also mention how you worked as a team. Maybe you did some sort of organization. If you think that you did anything that is worth highlighting, mention that. I think, the soft skills in data science are a lot more important than those highly technical roles. Like things like software engineering are less dependent on soft skills, but in data science, where your job is to communicate insights from technical to non-technical, soft skills are very, very important. And like using this as an opportunity to highlight that, I think is a great idea. So perhaps you use something similar to Agile or Scrum. We've been doing weekly stand-ups for the last 20 weeks now. That is one, I think that's an example of agile management. I think so. I forget. Or maybe it's Scrum. Anyways, read through these quick descriptions. If you feel like you use one of these workflows to manage your own projects, you can definitely mention that as well. All right. Did you create a dashboard? Now, data analyst roles are really all about dashboards nowadays, I feel. There's also like data visualization consultant as a possible job title that I saw, and they make a lot of money, which I was very surprised to see. But anyways, if you created a dashboard, you can use the keywords that you designed and populated a dashboard. I talked about Jupyter Dash. I talked about Dash last week as well. Jupyter Dash I talked about in week 1 of Capstones. If you decide to do something like that, you can mention it, even if you don't use Jupyter Dash or a dashboard. If you are familiar with like Tableau or even Excel dashboarding, I think it is worthwhile mentioning that you can create something like that is functional and easy for a non-technical person to use. I believe that in your post work, now after you graduate from this program, you'll actually get access to some post grad work. And it will be on, is it on Canvas? I think it might be on Canvas, I forget. But you'll get a link to it. And it does include some information on Tableau, which is one of the most popular dashboarding softwares. You can get a free version, I believe, and you can mess around. It's very much drag and drop data. I've had people ask me before, rather than using Matplotlib or Seaborn for visualizations, can you use Tableau? For our projects, no, because we need to know how to do visualizations through Python. But if you are interested in using Tableau, that's actually really easy. I found it really easy to pick up, especially after I learned how to code. It's pretty much like drag your CSV file or your Excel file, and you can like pick which columns to plot where. So that could be something that you look into as well. All right, and as I mentioned before, with education, you can put something like this on. Feel free to rephrase it however you want to make it look better on your resume. But yeah, those are my main tips and tricks for resumes. Again, feel free to send over your resume if you want me to have a look. Pretty much every student that I've had in the past, I've looked at their resumes and like made like little changes to some phrasings, or mentioned that, oh, maybe you should mention this because I remember a lot of your projects. So yeah, feel free to send them over. Remember, send it to me via a Google Doc like this. And at least give me comment access so that I can write my comments or like suggest changes and things like that. Cool. Any questions at this point? All right, well, if there's nothing else, sorry about the audio issues earlier, but I will, yeah, I'll be hanging on here for a little bit. Let me stop the recording real quick.